Welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and I am streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Studio on our midweek podcast. And it's not midweek yet, but we have some surprises for you later this week. So that's why we're doing a podcast early this week. And I have the privilege of having Dr. Laura Pennavaria on our show today. She's from Homestead Family Medical in Bend, Oregon, and she is a direct primary care practice. And for those of you that follow our podcasts and our videos, you guys are very familiar with direct primary care. If you aren't, please look at our YouTube site, the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy YouTube site, and just type in direct primary care. You will find a whole bunch of videos of how doctors are changing the system and going into direct primary care and helping patients, saving money and giving better quality care. So check out direct primary care. Dr. Pennavaria, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Shawn. It's a pleasure to be on. So I'm here to talk a little bit about suicide prevention today. It seems like the thing that people don't really want to talk about, and
Right.
doctors often kind of want to duck it in clinical practice. You know, when the patient throws out that "I'm suicidal" comment, it's often with when the doctor already has their hand on the doorknob, and it feels often like a hot potato. Really, I don't know what to do with this. My patient's suicidal. What do I do? So um, yeah, I kind of cracked that nut a few years ago, and did some research on what do you do with the suicidal prevention, the suicidal patient in primary care, and how do you handle that? So just going back a little bit, I just wanted to kind of tell folks like how I got interested in.
Yeah, that's what I was going
Yeah.
to ask you. There's usually always a story about why you get interested in something like this.
Right? It is. It's true. It's true. So I'm a family doctor, and I've been in practice more than 20 years. And about, I'm going to say 10 years ago or so, here in Bend, we had um, a fairly high profile, highly publicized suicide, and it was kind of not handled the right way by the press. Not through any fault of their own, honestly. It was kind of a lot of miscommunications and whatnot. And sometimes often when the press doesn't report on a suicide in the best way, there's some contagion in the community, and that is what happened. And I was working in I was not a direct primary care doctor at that time. I was working in a small practice or a mid-sized practice, and I was the director of that clinic. And people were coming out of the woodwork with suicidal ideation after that. It was kind of people were there to talk about their hair, and they, they were like, "Oh, and I've been thinking about suicide,"
Wow.
and we were all like, "What?" I mean, the nurses, everybody that was calling in, it was significant contagion in our community, and I was just like at a loss. The other providers, the doctors were coming to me and saying like, "What do we do with this?" And I honestly didn't know, because it's kind of a gap in our training, really. We don't really learn how to really sit with the suicidal patient and really help them in a way that's actually useful for them. And so I kind of went out into the community and started seeking out kind of experts, and I sought out information on like how do you address suicidality in primary care, and it turned out there wasn't a whole lot out there, and so I formed a work group in the local community, just of some interested providers from across all the practices, and we kind of all worked together and worked out a whole workflow so that there would be like no wrong door in the practice. Anybody, if anybody said "I'm suicidal" to any person in our practice, or said anything like that, not just the words "I'm suicidal," but just anything indicating that they were having suicidal ideation, that person would know what to do with it, whether they're the MA or the nurse or the front desk receptionist, the phlebotomist, whoever, they would all know what to do with it. So worked that out, and then ended up doing some research on how to talk to a suicidal gun owner. And that is actually what my published research is about. And that's what the really kind of mostly the topic of my presentations, when I do presentations, it's usually kind of because that is the big one. Honestly, most completed suicides are gun suicides. So
Interesting.
it's the big one. Uh, so that's kind of how I got into it, and
So it is, I think one of the reasons that I don't know that I mean, you kind of alluded to it already, is the reason that we're not educated on it as healthcare providers is I just think a lot of people we just don't know what to do with it. We just don't, because I
mhm,
can tell you I don't know what to do,
mhm,
and that's why I was very interested in your presentation today, because
yeah,
I want to be able to help others. And
right, yeah,
I think all of us really have had a personal story of a friend or a
oh
family member
yeah,
that has been in that situation,
yep.
or even worse, we have a friend or family member that,
It's completed
has
suicide, has died by
exactly,
suicide. Yes,
right.
absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things I really kind of wanted to maybe use this podcast to help bring out for other healthcare providers is just the language around suicidality and how it's changed. And um, you know, suicide used to be illegal, which is an interesting thing. I don't know how you prosecute that one,
Right.
but so that's how the term committed suicide came about, because they're committing a crime, and
Ah,
so it's and now we use the terminology more died by suicide, because they're we're not looking at it as a crime
right.
so much in this day and age, and um so that's just kind of one thing I wanted to bring out. But and then speaking of language, it's an interesting thing, because when I one of the things that I talk about in my talks is kind of how to talk about to the patient about suicidality, and how to ask that question. So so that you really, a lot of people are like, they're so afraid of the answer that they start with, "Well, you're not suicidal, are you?" Or, "Oh, you're not having suicidal thoughts, are you?" Because they really want the patient to say no. Please say no, because if you say
Oh,
yes, I really don't know what to do with the answer.
right.
So really, if you really want to know the answer, and you only really want to know the answer if you know what to do with the answer. So that's the other piece, right? And we'll talk about that too. But if you really want to know the answer, you need to ask in such a way that the patient feels confident that you can handle the answer. You really need to ask in a way that almost normalizes it for the patient. So I typically say something like, when a patient is feeling like you're feeling right now, when they're at the bottom of this deep chasm, they often will have thoughts of hurting themselves or even killing themselves, and it's very, very common. Have you had any thoughts like that? You see how that's a little bit of a
Wow, that
different
is
question.
right. That is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think that normally we would address it like that. So it's kind of,
Mhm.
you ask more of a, would it be an open-ended question maybe, or
Right.
yeah,
Well,
right.
kind of an invitation to share their feelings about suicide with you. But in order to get there, you have to feel comfortable with the answer. And when the patient says, "Yes, I've been having thoughts of suicide," you need to know what to do with that. And so, and I think that that's kind of where the rubber meets the road for a lot of doctors. And kind of the main thing to know is that, first of all, that suicidal patient, if you're not a direct primary care doctor, you're probably supposed to see 20 patients that day. So that patient is gonna wreck your schedule for the day. So
Right.
just go ahead and accept that your schedule's wrecked. But this is an emergency, and it's the most important patient that you have today. It's as if someone is having an MI right in front of you. That's what's happening when that suicidal patient tells you that, because if they're willing to tell you that, they are likely willing to follow through with it. And if not, they are wanting you to stop them. And that is the interesting piece too, is that most suicide, another little myth that doctors have is that asking someone if they're suicidal will plant the thought in their head, and it'll make them want to die by suicide. It'll make them, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." And what I like in that too is, like, I always say, teenagers don't think about sex because we talk about birth control with them. They're already thinking about sex. you know.
Right,
So,
right. Good analogy. Right.
so that you're not going to, plant the thought in a person's head. People are actually very relieved that you asked. People that are suicidal, they're typically like, I'm so glad you asked. At the, when you've kind of gotten to a safe place. They're glad you asked. So be bold. Ask about suicidality. I ask about it just now. I pretty much ask everyone about it. I uncover suicidality every week.
Wow. Just by
And
asking the questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I'm going to kind of go through a little bit about kind of what to do with the suicidal patient. Okay. And this isn't like a full course. There's a lot to learn. There is a CME available, and Shawn, I can get the link to you so that maybe you can make it available afterwards. Would that
Go
work?
ahead. Can you? Yeah, you sure can. Can you?
Okay.
Is a link available online?
Yeah. Yes. I just don't know where to send. I'd
Okay.
have to look it up right now, and it'd be a little.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we
I'm not
will.
very.
Yeah, we will have our editor put the link up
Okay.
afterwards on this
Perfect.
show, so we can provide it to
Perfect.
everybody. Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's kind of that CME, it's for medical providers. And so and it shows there are 4 videos that we produced that show how to have a conversation with a suicidal gun owner, and it kind of really demonstrates, and there's a little bit of repetitiveness to it, but it really kind of brings home. In each of the videos repeat a little bit, but it really brings the message home, really how to have that conversation. And it's very it's a very powerful video. I initially was trying to be the actor in the video, and then realizing that acting is an actual profession.
So
Yeah, I'm not.
you decided to keep playing doctor instead of
Yeah,
actor.
I was like, you know what? We're gonna hire an actual actor. So, so anyway, so wanted to just kind of one thing I really want to point out to folks about how to then manage this patient that's in front of you that's now suicidal, and you've just uncovered this, is to really the things that you're wanting to do is 2 things. Like, look at the risk factors and protective factors. Those are two important things. Look at the risk factors and protective factors, and then you want to leverage the protective factors. So risk factors for completing suicide are prior suicide attempt, family member with completed suicide, a middle-aged male is more likely to complete suicide, easy access to lethal means, recent significant loss, like loss of a job, loss of a significant relationship, that kind of things. Those are big risk factors. There are a lot of other risk factors, but those are the big risk factors. And then protective factors are things like of having a faith that doesn't support suicide, having a family that's supportive, having children in particular, having responsibilities, and kind of anything that the patient brings up. So
Can
when
I
go
can
ahead.
I can I
Yes.
have you clarify something?
Yes.
Um, okay, so you're telling me that a risk factor is having a supportive family. Is that correct?
No, that's a protective factor.
A protective factor. Oh, okay. I
Yes.
just want to clear that up.
Those are
Okay.
protective factors.
Okay,
So
good, good, good,
having a
good. Okay.
faith that, did I say risk? I'm sorry.
No,
Having a
no, you
oh,
did not.
okay.
I was kind of a little bit confused. I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure that our guests and our podcast listeners and viewers probably caught on, but I didn't. So
Okay, all right, good. So those are protective factors,
okay.
things that and then when you talk to the patient, you can if you don't know the patient well, if you know the patient well, like if you're a direct primary care doctor, you know what the protective factors are because you know
Right.
your patient. But if you don't know your patient well, when you're talking to them, you can ask them questions like uh, so when you explore the suicidality with someone, you need to ask them what their plan is. So if someone says, yes, I have been thinking about suicide, what you want to ask is and when you think about suicide, what in particular are you thinking about doing? And then just be quiet and let them, because it's going to take them a minute to answer. And then when they answer, they'll tell you their plan. And then once they tell you your plan, and then you should ask, and if that were not available to you, is there a backup plan? Because sometimes people have a backup plan. And then if they have a backup plan, you ask after that one. And if that were not available to you, is there another plan? And what's interesting about suicide is that people will people are accepting, personally accepting for their own suicide of certain methods, but not others. And that's been illustrated time and again. There are a lot of studies done on suicide attempt survivors, and and there's a person, for example, let's say there's one. This is a real example. Someone went to a bridge that wanted to jump off the bridge, but from where he parked, he couldn't get to the point he wanted to jump off of because there was too much traffic, and he didn't want to get hit by a car. So it doesn't seem to make sense, but
Right. I mean, that wouldn't make sense to somebody that's not suicidal, right?
right. But it's a very, very common theme. We see it again and again. And so if you can protect them from their methods of choice, you're protecting them. So that's kind of an important one, right? And so once you've kind of uncovered that suicidality, then you say, now when you think about doing that plan, what are the things that are stopping you from doing it? And that sounds like a loaded question. Like, why would you ask someone that? Like, what's stopping you? Go do it. You're not saying that.
Right.
You're saying, you really are asking them what's stopping them, because something is stopping them. Okay. And that is the thing you need to leverage. So when they say, well, I could never do that to my kids. Oh, 100%. You can never do that to your kids. I mean, listen, children. And then I had a patient, this is recent, to say, well, I talked to my husband, and, no, well, her first thing was, he'll understand when he grows up, her child. And I said, no, that's not actually what happens to children whose parents die by suicide. They don't understand later. It's a huge risk factor for him to now die by suicide. That's the legacy you'll be leaving. I'm just very blunt, because that is the truth, And then she came back with, later, another visit, her husband. She had talked to her husband. He's going to tell him a different story if she ends up dying by suicide. I'm like, well, he's an intelligent child, and he's going to eventually figure it out, So there were, like, there are things like that you have that conversation. Just be in that conversation. And you want to leverage those protective factors the best that you can. So
one thing I take out of the last few paragraphs of your presentation, is that, I excuse my ignorance on the subject, and that's why one of the things I love about our podcast is I get to interview people like yourself that are experts on subjects that I learn a lot about. So I'm sure our listeners and viewers are learning a lot also. And one thing that I'm taking out of this is, like, as an ignorant person on the subject, just like you said about the person with the bridge was worried about getting hit by a car, but he wasn't worried about jumping off a bridge.
right.
My thought was, okay, well, if somebody's going to commit suicide, okay, and their idea was a gun, which you're going to talk about a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we lock the guns up. Well, great. Then they just find, drugs or a knife or whatever
Mm-hmm.
to kill themselves. But from what you're telling me, that's usually not the plan. Usually, if you stop the first primary thing, you will prevent suicide. Am I wrong at saying that?
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, you do have to uncover a backup plan, so make sure that they're the backup plan, because some people do have a backup plan. Backup plan is usually not very preferred, though, interestingly. And so, but the primary plan, that suicide is largely an impulsive act. So largely, not all suicides are impulsive, but the vast majority of people, again, with these like suicide attempt survivors, how long did you think about suicide before you, whatever it is, pulled the trigger or whatever it is? 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Really?
Yes. And so um, people may have a plan in the back of their mind, and then and then when they but to actually execute on that plan, it's only a matter of a few minutes. And so you need to make the execution of that plan impossible. And so that's kind of where the rubber meets the road with suicide prevention. So I personally use the Stanley Brown safety plan. It's a very you can find it anywhere. It's available online, and it really kind of, you walk through like how to keep someone safe. One thing that's really old school thinking is patient contracting for safety. That used to be a thing where we would say, okay, well, you've told me you're suicidal, and now I need you to sign this right here, this contract saying you're not going to hurt yourself. It's a contract between you and me. Okay, come on, you've agreed now, right? You're basically saying to the patient, the only thing that matters is my liability. Your life is actually less important to me than my liability. Here, sign here. Without helping them and telling them what to do or anything.
Right.
It's
So
just
you're
like,
saying that's something that we shouldn't do.
please don't do that. Yeah,
Okay.
please don't do
And
that. It's
and
insulting to patients.
and we'll put a
It's
link
hurtful.
to
The
yes.
Stanley Brown. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put a link to Stanley Brown. What was it again? Mention it one more
Suicide.
time, Dr.
It's
Laura.
a
Stanley Brown, right?
Stanley Brown is
Okay.
that's the researchers that did it.
And our editor will put that in the show notes for the
Perfect.
edited version.
Okay, good. And it's a safety plan. Sorry, it's a safety
Okay,
plan.
perfect.
Right.
Yep.
So patient safety plan. So so I go through a safety plan with the patient, a full safety plan, and I'm not going to kind of go through how to do a safety plan with the patient. That's been very well documented by others. You can get that information anywhere. That's it,
Is
Stanley
that
Brown.
what we're streaming,
Yep.
Steph? Okay.
That's Stanley
Awesome.
Brown.
So
Perfect.
yeah, and
Yeah,
we'll also put a link to
perfect.
that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that looks great.
Excellent. Excellent. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Perfect. But I will talk a little bit about how to talk to the suicidal gun owner about their guns.
Please.
So our research really was kind of about how to talk to the suicidal gun owner, and it's really is a cultural conversation, interestingly. So there are people on people that really feel strongly on both sides of the gun debate. This is not about gun the gun debate, or
Right.
whether or not it's right to have guns or anything like that. It's really just about keeping people safe when they are suicidal. So things to know. Well, let me just say, here I'll just kind of encapsulate how we did our research and what it's about really quick. So it's a I can give you a link to the papers too, so that people can see those as well. But so what we did was I was working in a rural clinic at the time, and we set up a few uh, key informant. We did some key informant interviews, and we did some study groups. We invited people to talk. We said we asked first. It was interesting that because at first they made this flyer saying something about, we want to talk to you about your guns or some crazy thing. I don't know what they put on the flyer, but I said, we're not going to get people here to,
Right.
And so I said, let's put on the flyer what we're really talking about, how to keep suicidal people safe with guns safe. And we had a lot of gun owners show up because, it turns out gun owners are very interested in having other gun owners not kill themselves with their guns. It makes it difficult for everyone,
Right.
and the reality is that it's a fairly tight knit community that I think would, and they're supportive of each other, and really, what we found was, if you knew someone that has a gun and you knew they were suicidal, would you want to do something to keep them safe? And 100% of people said yes.
Right.
And so then what we did was we kind of tested some messaging, because what I had been doing over the years was like refining my own message as I was speaking to people about suicidality and speaking to gun owners. And I stepped in it a number of times before I, kind of got some better language down and really kind of understood how to have an honest, thoughtful, and very authentic conversation with someone that's a gun owner and is suicidal. And so there are things you don't say, there are things you do say. But what we found was we came up with three messaging, three messages. One was a kind of a more of a culturally informed message that was like, and one was the standard public health message, which is basically lock up your guns, use gun locks, and then it was a combination of the two, and we tested all three messages for how to keep suicidal gun owners safe. And what do you think the finding was, Shawn? What do you think we came up with? What do you think we found? Just a
Well,
guess.
I'm getting surprised so much throughout this whole podcast that I'll probably say the wrong answer. But I mean, my guess in a broad term would be to confiscate their guns is what I think the common solution would be. But I will tell you, being a gun owner myself, I just don't think that would go over very well.
Right.
So
Yeah. So
I don't
no,
know. I'm at a loss.
the message that worked was the combination message. So like it wasn't like lock up your guns. It wasn't, but it also wasn't just, they kind of were like, we need to have a solution, So that's kind of what we figured out. And then uh so so basically what the way that I kind of talk to a suicidal gun owner is just that I just come out and I talk to every suicidal patient. I ask them about their guns in the same way, and I don't necessarily know if they're a gun owner or not. I just say, pretty much what I say is, so what are we going to do with your guns right now while you're having this crisis? What should we do with them to keep you safe? I ask them, what should we do? And then we come up with a plan together. We either find someone in their family that can hold them, or I've had people that do, like, they put them in their gun safe and they change the combo, and their spouse changes the combo.
Mhm.
There's stuff like that. There's little things you can, there some places where the law enforcement will hold them, and I always encourage the patient themselves to contact law enforcement. I don't ever, contact law enforcement for that, but there are communities where law enforcement is very, very supportive and really wants to keep people safe, and they'll hold your guns. They'll put them in a locker for you, you know, give them back to you, no questions asked. So, but there are a lot of things you can do, but that's kind of how I do it. And I say, and if they say, well, my brother well, I think my brother, he probably would be willing to hold them for me. And then I'll say, okay, let's get him on the phone. I mean,
Wow.
there's
Yeah.
nothing about this, we're going to call your brother right now,
Right. Well, and I
so.
gotta say, I mean, being a gun owner myself and having a brother, that alone, if I was in that situation, I mean, that alone is very powerful. And
100%,
I mean,
Shawn.
and then it's
Yes.
just gonna say, then I'm just gonna say, wait a minute, here's a doctor taking time to do this that cares about me, and then she's gonna call somebody that really cares about me, my brother. I mean, then all of a sudden, I can just imagine that, a
Yes, the
calm
way
comes.
it
Yeah.
unfolds is beautiful, I will tell you. And even with not guns, I did this with a patient whose plan was to go out into the woods as far as she could possibly walk, take a bunch of pills, lay down and hope that animals find her. And 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 so, how do you take that away from someone, right? You know? And so, but what we did was I said, "Well, who can we bring into this conversation to keep you safe? Who can we call today to talk about this?" And it was her sister. And we called their sister, and we're like, okay, let's get her down here. And her sister came down to the clinic, and we're sitting in a room, and I was like not even necessary after that, really.
Wow, but you started the conversation. I mean, that's just so powerful,
And that's all it takes. It's as simple
right?
as that.
But
Look
we've
at how
gotta
you
be
can prevent suicide with something so simple.
right, but we've gotta be aware as healthcare
Yes,
providers, and we just
yes.
gotta be
And
asking the right
willing.
questions and right, willing. And I will tell you, myself, it's a very, very hard topic for me to discuss just because I haven't really been trained about it. So,
Right.
like you say early on in our like you said earlier on in our podcast, you don't really want to ask the question because you don't want them to say yes, because then you're going to deal with it and you don't really know
Right.
how.
Right. Right. What are you gonna do? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been I've had some very interesting um, encounters with patients, and in most cases, we really can keep people safe without hospitalizing them. I had a patient I had to hospitalize twice recently, for suicidality. We just couldn't. She knew she wasn't going to be able to be safe, and she wanted to be safe, but she couldn't. It's just a hard spot for people to be at. People
Well,
that haven't been suicidal often don't understand that spot. It's hard for us to get, I think, but this feeling of wanting to live and not wanting to live at the same time, they're holding those two feelings at the same time. So, um, so when people are don't understand that, they often will almost ridicule the suicidal patient, saying, "See, they want to live. But yes, they want to live, but they also don't want to live. And we need to help that part of them. That's the 95% of them wants to live. We need to
right.
help that part of them to succeed and be the part that wins."
Yeah. So I got a question for you,
Yeah.
and you weren't prepared for this. I want to put you on the
Uh-oh.
spot, but but since you're an expert in this subject, um, so I I recently heard about a senior that would have been graduating, and the school did not want to recognize him at all because of they didn't want to make suicide. They didn't want to glorify suicide.
Mhm.
So I mean, by recognizing suicide, are we glorifying it or are we making people aware? Do you have any comments on
Mhm.
that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's a way to talk about suicide. There's like suicide safe reporting. There's like reporting guidelines, and um, our I know in our school district in Bend Pine School District, they have that suicide safe messaging that they send out to parents, and there are ways to honor without glorifying,
Mhm.
and, but, but I will say I understand where the school's coming from in a way, because children are especially, susceptible to the contagion that can happen with suicide. Um, the very irresponsible, uh, production called, I don't know what it was called, it was on Netflix series about a teenager that commits suicide or dies by suicide, sorry. Thinking of
What's it called, Steph?
13 Reasons Why or something like that.
What is it, Steph?
13 Reasons Why?
Yeah, yeah, that's what Steph says. My
Was that
producer
it?
says, yeah, she
Oh
says
my
she's
gosh.
seen it. Yeah,
Oh my gosh, that's like Contagion City. So they really didn't do a good job on that one, and it's not very. I will say it's irresponsible for Hollywood to be making movies and shows without consulting the experts, and so they did some harm with that one.
wow.
They're going to say they did good, but mm-mm.
So
So
go ahead.
no, I was just your original question was
Yeah,
kind of like how to talk about it and how to it's a what the thing to not do is to kind of glorify it. I mean, there's a way of talking about suicide without make exaggerating it.
yeah, absolutely,
Every death of a child is tragic.
absolutely. So I want to go back to one of the thing a lot for me and hopefully for our listeners and viewers, because I want to know how to phrase the about 8 minutes into our podcast. You
Ask the
gave a phrase
patient.
how we ask the patient. Will you repeat that
Okay.
one more time?
Okay. Now this is just how I ask. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's,
right. But it but
right.
it gives us a good
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
And okay. Yeah. And it's just kind of so, um, the typical scenario is someone's very depressed and is in a deep depression or has experienced a crisis in their life. So typically what I'll say is something like, oftentimes, when patients are in a situation like yours, when they're very, very depressed or they've had a crisis like you've had, they have thoughts of suicide or thoughts of hurting themselves. It's very common. Have you had any thoughts like that?
Very powerful. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
love that.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've really taken away from this, and I think we have to change our wording as healthcare professionals or as society in general. I think we did this. This is kind of a side note, but an analogy. Um, if you remember, Dr. Pennavaria, we used to say when somebody had cancer and they survived cancer, we used to call them, cancer victims. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
And then we changed the term to cancer survivor
Yeah,
because it
right.
just sounds a lot better, right?
Mhm, sure.
Um, well, I didn't know the history of the suicide, and committed suicide means
Mhm,
that they were committing a crime, and now that makes
mhm,
sense.
mhm.
So, really, what we want to say instead of committed suicide is die by suicide.
Die by
Died by
suicide,
suicide is
right.
is really a better
Or
term to do that.
completed suicide, right.
Okay, but not
Mhm,
committed because that means
mhm.
that a crime was involved.
Right,
Yeah,
it
right.
just yeah, this is a suffering human we're talking about, not a criminal.
Right, exactly. Right, right. So, as we thank you so much for all this information. This is very,
Sure.
very powerful. As we wrap this up, I would like to ask you, what do you have a passion for?
Oh, shoot. So much.
Putting you on the spot.
I will tell you, I definitely did not miss my calling. I have a passion for serving my patients. I absolutely love being a family doctor. I love serving families, and because I really feel like you can understand people so much better in the context of their family. And I'm a direct primary care doctor, which is just the best, of course.
Yep,
This is what we thought we were signing up for when we
yep.
signed up for medicine, right? And yeah, so I'm passionate about serving my patients and
Well, and I can tell you when I met you out of the blue just a few months ago, I could tell that that was rather obvious that you had a passion for taking care of your patients and you were very, very happy to be doing what you're doing. And I love that. We need more doctors like you doing that.
thank you, Sean.
Yeah. Well,
Sweet of you to
thank
say.
you. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions or they want to find out more about you and your practice, how do they do that?
Well, you can check out my website at homesteadfamilymedicine.org, or you can email me at lkpennavaria at homesteadfamilymedicine.org. There it is. Yeah, there's the in email us yeah, there you go. There you go. That's probably an easy
Awesome.
way.
Thank you so much, Steph, for putting that up there. And Dr. Pennavaria, this has been a great show. I really appreciate you giving us all this information to our listeners and viewers. And I think there's another subject that you have a passion for that you would like to talk on. So we'll have to schedule you for that. I don't remember what the subject
Sounds
was.
good. All
What was
right, very
this?
good.
What was the
Oh,
subject? You remember?
Suboxone prescribing in
Oh
primary
yeah, that's
care.
right. That's right.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so we will definitely talk about that. We've never done that in our podcast, so we'll have
Okay.
you on again to talk about that. You've been a
That would be
wonderful
my
guest.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much today, and stay tuned
Thank
for the
you.
edited version with all the links.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
having me, Sean.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, thanks for tuning in, listeners and viewers, to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. You will see us. Don't be surprised, or you will be surprised, but Friday we will have a surprise for you. So stay tuned for Friday morning because we will be traveling somewhere special and you guys will get to see the tour. So stay tuned for that with Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. And Monday, as always, we will be streaming live on the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Facebook page, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. So tune into that. And thank you for listening to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Thank you.